to the last sermon that will likely make me blush more than all the others. After this, we're never coming back to this again. I mean, we'll give it another 45 years minimum. You know, when the little ones need to hear this. You know, but now you guys know it, so you can teach it to your little ones, and I don't have to. It'll be awesome. You know? No, I've enjoyed this series. I hope that you guys have been getting some good little nuggets from it regarding your relationships with your spouse or potentially with dating relationships or whatever situation you might be in. I hope that this has been a good series for you guys to take away some good principles regarding how we handle some of these different topics in a godly way. Now, if you've been with us throughout the whole thing, it's been a long process. We've gone through a lot of different stages. We've dealt with the early dating stage of kind of that beginning, first few dates where everybody's flirtatious and, it's kind of like, will they, won't they kind of scenario. We've dealt with the more committed relationships as far as starting to look at getting ready for marriage. We've looked at the actual wedding ceremony. We've looked at what happens after the wedding ceremony. And last week we looked at how do we handle conflict in our marriages. How do godly couples handle disagreements and conflict and fights and things of that nature. And so this week we're going to wrap it up and we're going to conclude our series, and there's one last stage that I really want us to look at, and we are going to kind of see a little bit of some trickling from the last sermon into this one, but then we are going to be looking at a new thing that tends to happen if your marriage is going the way that God has intended. Today we're going to have the ability to kind of look at our couple down the road now that they have been married, had their honeymoon, had their first big fight. We're going to see what kind of happens and unfolds later on in a marriage. And I would argue that likely this is probably maybe 10 to 15 years roughly into the marriage is kind of where we end things today. But before we do, we got to deal with some awkwardness. Okay, so there's one last little scenario. I'm going to blush. It's unavoidable. And that's because I'm teaching it differently than how Matt Chandler, which if you've been following along, we've been looking at his book, The Mingling of Souls. He teaches this next portion differently than I'm going to teach it. So if what I say makes you uncomfortable, go with it. This is a little easier to deal with. But this is what it says. This is Song of Songs, chapter 7. Now, if you're following along in the app, I want to go ahead and apologize. I don't really know exactly what happened as I was inputting things into the app. The two different passages, they got backwards. So chapter 8 comes first, chapter 7 comes second. We're in chapter 7. I'm not doing something weird where we're starting at the end and then moving back. So I apologize for that. I don't know what happened. But this is what it says. Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 1. We're going through, and please bear with me. This is what he says. This is the man talking to his woman, his wife, and they just had their fight. They're starting to kind of make up. This is a continuation of what tends to happen when you make up after a big fight. So we're going to deal with that. Verse 1. How beautiful are your sandaled feet, princess. The curves of your thighs are like jewelry, the handiwork of a master. Your navel is a rounded bowl. It never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a mound of wheat surrounded by lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory. Your eyes like pools in Heshbon by Bath Rabim's gate. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon, looking toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel. The hair of your head like purple cloth. A king could be held captive in your tresses. How beautiful you are, and how pleasant, my love, with such delights. Your stature is like a palm tree. Your breasts are like clusters of fruit. I said, I will climb the palm tree and take hold of its fruit. May your breasts be like clusters of grapes, and the fragrance of your breath like apricots. Your mouth is like fine wine. And then the woman kind of interjects and says, flowing smoothly for my love, gliding past my lips and teeth. I am my love's, and his desire is for me. I'm probably already red. I kind of feel it. It doesn't help that I'm wearing a jacket, and we don't have air running this time because it's cold outside. Well, it's cold to me. But, okay, fellas, gentlemen, we have been doing this for a while. Eyes up here, ears turn, listening ears on. Don't say some of these things. Don't say some of these things. It's weird. The beauty standard of Jewish women back when this song is written is not the same as it is today. Okay, so when he says stuff like, your belly is a mound of wheat surrounded by lilies, what that kind of means is like, you look like you can eat and you look well fed. Maybe we don't say that today, right? So we still have this principle of find nice, cute ways to flirt and, be good at flirting and be romantic towards your girl, but don't copy-paste this into your love life. It's not going to go well. If you look at her and you say, you look well-fed, that ain't going to go well, I promise. But again, we have to keep in mind that there were different socially accepted things that were considered different beauty standards, right? So we looked at how she's considered tan, and they consider that a bad thing. Nowadays, it's like if you have that nice, bronze tan, it's like you live at the beach and, you have a good time and you surf and swim all day. Not then. And being super well fed back then meant that you had plenty of resources. It was a compliment back then, not today. Probably don't compare your girl to a tree. Probably don't compare certain parts of her to fruit and, start climbing that bad boy. You know what I'm saying? We don't need to, maybe we find new ways of going about this. But essentially what I want to highlight about this is that we've just seen them in a conflict, right? We've just seen them, they've had their argument. He goes and, is trying to have the fruits of marital labor. That's what he's trying to do. And she's like, not tonight, babe. I'm not feeling good. I got a headache. Whatever the excuse might be. She's like, I'm not down to do that tonight. I've just, bathed. I've just put on my PJs. I've just, taken off my slippers. I'm in bed. I'm reading. I don't want to have to shower again. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the fight that happens. He feels rejected by her, so he walks away, and immediately she feels as if she has kind of hurt him, and she knows that there's now this conflict, so she rushes after him to kind of make amends and to make up, and as they come together, there's this big scene of flirtation that's going on, and this is what he says as that flirtation starts to kick off. As this comes to its close, this is what he starts to say. And so now that they have had this fight and there's been this conflict and she's gone looking after him and she has found him and she said some nice things about him and he has said some nice things about her, now they are back to this flirting of hey, I know that we just had our fight. I know that that's just what happened. We've made up. We're on good grounds. I still love you, and because of my deep love for you and my affection to you, I still want to be with you sexually. That's what is basically happening here. And what I kind of love, mostly because I'm really big into cringy Disney movies and the cliche lovey-dovey movies. Admittedly, I'm big into the rom-coms. Please don't hate me for that. Anyway, what often happens is you have this situation where you have man, you have woman, they start talking, they start to get to know each other, and they start to finish each other's sentences. And it's this awesome, amazing thing that takes place in movies where you start to realize that you're on the same brainwave, and as he is saying this stuff, and as he gets to her mouth and what it's like, she completes the sentence. He says, your mouth is like fine wine, and she cuts him off, and she says, it's flowing smoothly for my love, gliding past my lips and teeth. I am my love's, and his desire is for me. And so now they have kind of made up. Everything is good. Things are good to go when it comes to their relationship. And we're going to kind of avoid the next few verses, not because it makes me uncomfortable. If there's anything that you guys know, I've clearly read a lot of uncomfortable things. So it's nothing like that. It's a continuation of what takes place now that they have made up. But the point that I want to let you guys see as married couples is that when you fight, there should be resolution. There should be resolution in godly marriages, and I'm not saying that conflicts are just going to fix themselves overnight, right? I don't want to paint this false picture and act like this takes place, in an instant. Many of you who have been married, I've never been married, but I still know this. Some conflicts, they last for a while. And as I mentioned earlier on in our series when we talked about the serious dating, we have these foxes that show up in the story, and she says that she wants those foxes rid of. She wants him to get rid of the foxes so that the love that they have for each other is not ruined, that the vineyard of love is not devastated. That's what her desire is, and it's very clear that that's what his desire is because they continue to move forward. And it's almost like we get this look back at that, which I don't even know if that made sense, but it made sense in my head and it rhymed, so I went with it. But that's kind of what we have, is this alluding back to the past. They've had this fight, but they still have the commitment and the covenant of their marriage that they are not going anywhere, and it doesn't matter what comes between them, they will resolve the conflict because of the love that they have for each other. And in godly marriages, it's so, so, so important that we fight for the marriage. Now, in Matt's book, he gets this advice given to him when he's kind of dating his wife, and they are kind of in this stage of trying to figure out if they're going to end up together. And he gets this advice, and I think it's good advice that I want to give to you guys because at the end of the day, it's 100% true. No marriage or relationship goes on without fights. So it comes down to you to decide, who do you want to fight with for the rest of your life? That's what it boils down to. And some of you who are married, you're laughing because you know that this is true. You've had your fights, and it boils down to the decision of, who am I going to fight with, and are they worth putting in this level of effort? Are they worth fighting with, and are they worth fighting for? In that dating stage of deciding whether or not you guys are going to end up in marriage, that is kind of the last exit for the train to decide whether or not you get off, because I'm just going to throw this out there, that biblically speaking, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to the covenant bond of marriage, once you enter into that covenant, that contract relationship, which we've kind of talked about, where it's not just between you and one other person, but between you and that person and God, you bring him into the mix. When that happens, that exit is long gone. It is time to start learning how to fight with that person, which is why we looked at how to fight fair. But it's also important to realize that it's now time to fight for that person. And that's where that conflict resolution comes in. And that is what we see unfold in Song of Songs, chapter 7. Now, moving into chapter 8, we see another continuation, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it. So this is Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 1. This is the woman's response. And again, I want to preface this by saying that she's going to bring up this brotherly relationship. And again, it's not weird. This isn't some weird kind of thing going on. It's meant to show us this desire to have a deep relational bond with somebody. That's kind of what's going on. So this is what it says. Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 1. If only I could treat you like my brother, one who nursed at my brother's breasts. I would find you in public and kiss you, and no one would scorn me. I would lead you. I would take you to the house of my mother who taught me. I would give you spiced wine to drink from the juice of my pomegranate. May his left hand be under my head, and his right arm embrace me. And then verse 4. Young women of Jerusalem, I charge you, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. This woman responds to this man who wants things to be good. He wants them on good terms with one another. He wants the problem to be a part of the past, and he wants to look towards the future. And her response is, if only I could treat you like my brother. And that sounds really weird because you're like, why is she kissing her brother? I would argue, and some scholars who actually know more about the Bible than I do, but some of the scholars that do know more about the Bible would agree with me, so that's why I'm bringing this up. They would argue that there's a good possibility that to have displays of public affection back at this time, regardless of whether or not you're a spouse or just a dating relationship, just public displays of affection were not really meant to go on. It was kind of taboo. That would be kind of where my head is at as I read this. Whereas if you have a brother or a sister or a mother or father, those kinds of outward displays of affection amongst immediate relatives was considered to be socially acceptable. And so my guess is that you have this situation where she wishes that they were almost related because she is so overcome with her passion for him and her desire for him that she wishes that she could be publicly affectionate with him without people looking down on her for it. And this kind of dialogue continues. I would lead you to the house of my mother who taught me, most likely, mother who taught me about intimacy. She kind of wants to do some intimate things. So that's kind of what's unfolding there. But then, again, we get to verse 4. And that's the part that I want to focus on regarding this little section of the passage. Verse 4, as I had mentioned earlier on in our series, we have 3 mentions of this idea. Do not awaken or stir love before the appropriate time. We see it at the early stages of dating. We see it when their relationship gets a little bit more serious. And I said, we don't see it until the very last chapter. The way that I interpret this whole book to unfold is that we now have this married couple. We have this woman who is in a covenant marriage with her man. And at this point, some scholars believe that they are getting a little bit older into age. Whether or not that's true, I don't entirely know. But I think that I'm pretty convinced of some of the arguments. That this couple has now entered into some of the older stages of marriage. And so she appeals to the young women of Jerusalem. Now, this woman is probably right around the age of 28, maybe early 30s. She would be considered a young woman to many of us today. We have to keep in mind, this is a different time. And actually, to this day, in Jewish tradition, men and women both, they have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, and that is them having this coming of age celebration. And traditionally it happens around the age of 12 or 13. And the idea is that when they have this celebration and they have this bat mitzvah for women or bar mitzvah for men, these 12 or 13-year-olds are considered adults in Jewish tradition. So, and I know some of you are like, I would never consider my 13-year-old to be an adult. Some of you have like 20-year-olds, you're like, I wouldn't even consider them to be adults. But again, different times. So, we have this older woman in a married, covenantal relationship, and she looks at the younger women who have not quite approached that stage of their life, and she says, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. Do not stir it up until you have that covenant relationship. Older women of the church, I would urge you to take and lead by her example. That when you are around some of these younger women, some of the teenagers in your life, some of the ones who are in high school, and honestly, older men, I would encourage you to do the same, but it specifically says young women, so that's why I'm specifically mentioning it. But older people who are at this stage where you have maybe been married for a while, you're a little bit farther down the road in regards to some of these topics that we've looked at, I would suggest that you take it upon yourself to teach those who are younger and not at that stage yet. I think it would be very beneficial to teach them and show them the ropes of what godly marriage and godly relationships look like. And to make a full 360 back to the very first sermon that I preached in this series, we have to remember that our younger generations, they are learning about sex, they are learning about relationships, they are learning about marriage, they are learning about divorce, they are learning about all of these topics somewhere. It might as well be from people who want them to walk in godliness. And I understand that some of those conversations, they're awkward, they feel kind of weird to have with, some of the younger generations, and I understand that. But what I'm telling you is that they are learning it somewhere. They're learning it from television, they're learning it from their phones, they're learning it from their tablets, they're learning it from their friends at school, they are learning it somewhere. It might as well be here. And it might as well be godly advice. So now we approach verse 5, and the young women, they say this: who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on the one she loves? And then the woman says, I awakened you under the apricot tree. There your mother conceived you. There she conceived and gave you birth. Set me as a seal on your heart, as a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as unrelenting as Sheol. Love's flames are fiery flames, an almighty flame. A huge torrent cannot extinguish love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If a man were to give all his wealth for love, it would be utterly scorned. Now, I want to pause right there because amongst this, we have this discussion and this huge imagery that we see of being a seal upon the heart and a seal upon the arm. This woman is saying to her man, I'm not going anywhere. This is the same language that we kind of see in the New Testament when it comes to the Holy Spirit being set upon our hearts as a seal for our salvation. There's not anything we can do to kick the Holy Spirit out, and I'm not saying that we can't walk away from faith. I'm not saying that. I'm not here to have doctrinal conversation. We cannot sin and make enough mistakes that the Holy Spirit is just gone and totally done with us. And what she's saying here is that I am with you to the end. I am with you to the end. This is a covenant marriage. This is a till death do us part, because love is just as strong as death. It's going to take death to separate me from you. And then we see that imagery that we've kind of already looked at a little bit of love and being this flame. And we've talked about how sex is similar to this flame, and it can be used as a tool to either benefit or to harm. And on that note, what I find here is this little warning. It's this little warning, and it's that very last sentence. And it says, if a man were to give all his wealth for love, it would be utterly scorned. And at first glance, you might look at that and be like, what does that mean? Like, is that somebody who would be willing to give all of their money so that they can have love? Because in 2023, that seems like somebody who's super romantic is somebody who's willing to give up everything to be with the one that they love. That's not what's going on here. You see, in the book of Proverbs, in chapter 6, we find a very similar statement about a man who gives away all his wealth for love. And in Proverbs chapter 6, what you find is that giving up all the wealth, that is a reference to a penalty that he has to pay for an adulterous affair. That's what happens in Proverbs chapter 6. You see Solomon, who writes Proverbs chapter 6, and he's giving advice to his son, and he's saying, don't get caught up in your lusts, don't get caught up with prostitutes and adultery, don't do it, because it is not going to be worth it to lose all of your wealth due to a dumb mistake like having an affair. And I want to reiterate that. This is a warning regarding faithfulness in a marriage. Many of you, if you've been in a situation where an affair has taken place, you know and have seen firsthand the devastation that takes place. I understand that when it comes to marriages, when it comes to relationships, there's often dry spells. There's often times where you've been together so long, you have some kind of fight that breaks out, you can't stand the thought of your person, you don't want to be around them, you certainly don't want to be intimate with them. I get that. The warning here is don't go looking for love, and it's kind of this play on words of love being equated to lust. Don't go chasing lustful desires because it's not currently being fulfilled in the home, and risk everything that you have. It's not worth it, and that's not what happens in covenantal love. That's not what Jesus does with us. He doesn't go looking for others, and we are not supposed to go looking towards other gods and other idols in regards to Jesus. So in our marriages, don't look elsewhere for your satisfaction. Don't do it because the penalty that you pay is not worth the small little reward that you get. Picking up in verse 8, we have this interesting little event that unfolds, and it's very strange. Arguably, you have this woman's brothers who now speak for the first time. Remember the brothers that forced her to work in the fields, were kind of mean and rude and crass to her. Remember those brothers? I think we see some of this interesting stuff unfold with these brothers. These are either their own words or her relaying some of the things that they have said. This is what it says. Our sister is young. She has no breasts. What will we do for our sister on the day that she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build a silver barricade on her. If she is a door, we will enclose her with cedar planks. And she says, I am a wall, and my breasts like towers. So to him, I have become like one who finds peace. Now, there's a lot of weird stuff that doesn't make any sense to us reading this now. If you read it and you're not trying to find out the deeper meaning for it, it makes very little sense. So, allow me to give my best attempt at breaking this down. Keep in mind, this book has been interpreted in many, many, many different ways. I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct on my interpretation of it. I'm saying based on my research and the way that I have started to look at and read and interpret, this is what's unfolding. My argument is that these brothers are now in this protective phase. They're in this protective phase, and I think that this is kind of looking back on what has unfolded before their marriage. I think this is kind of a conversation that might be remembered back when they were dating and first starting this blooming love. I think that's kind of what's unfolding, is that we are looking back at what happens before the marriage. And so these brothers, they're being kind of protective, and they're seeing their young sister, and they want to keep out the people away from her. And so they're wondering, well, is she a wall? And if she is, we're going to build a barricade around her. If she's a door, we're closing that door. We're going to board it up with planks. And so we have this imagery of a wall being this woman who might be excited to start engaging in sexual activity. And there's no real way around that. That's kind of what is unfolding. And so they're like, look, if she is a wall, we're going to make sure that nobody tries to overtake this wall. And if she's a door, we're closing that door up. So if she's even interested, we're making sure nobody takes advantage. And her response is, I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. I am a wall. But for him, I'm someone who's found peace. Now, I want you to think about medieval times and castles and things like that, when we have big, huge brick walls and they have gates. In times of war, what happens to the gate? We close it, right? That gate gets closed, whether it's a big ironclad gate, it gets closed, whether it's a drawbridge, we close it. In times of peace, what happens? We can lower the drawbridge, we can open the gate. And so what is unfolding is that this woman is saying, look, I am a wall. I have maintained my purity, I have maintained my virginity, and this man who I love, he is worth becoming like someone who finds peace. Because of his character, because of who he is, and it kind of helps that he's pretty darn good looking, because of all of these factors, I am like one who finds peace. And so they enter into a marriage so that the man can kind of enter the walls, so to speak. Picking up in verse 11, she continues to say this, and there's some argument about whether she says this or whether the man says it. It doesn't really change much. We're going to deal with it. This is what it says. Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 11. Solomon owned a vineyard in Baal-Hamon. He leased the vineyard to tenants. Each was to bring his fruit, 1,000 pieces of silver. I have my own vineyard. The 1,000 are for you, Solomon, but 200 for those who take care of its fruits. You who dwell in the gardens, this is the man speaking. Companions are listening for your voice. Let me hear you. And then the woman's response in the last words of this long, interesting series. Run away with me, my love, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices. As I've kind of already mentioned, the argument here is that we have our couple, and they're older. They're a little bit farther along the path of marriage, of their relationship. And what we see is this allusion to Solomon. And as I mentioned a handful of times, I don't believe that the man represented in this story is Solomon. And we are now at the point why I don't believe that it's solid. Because this woman, or possibly this man, they say, whoever it is, they say, I have my one vineyard. I have my vineyard. I have who I am content with. I have my one. Solomon, you can keep your 1,000. You can keep your 1,000. I have my one. And I'm happy with my one. And they go on to talk and continue to flirt, even into older age. And I know you're thinking like early 30s is not old, but even longer into this marriage, there is still this push of flirtation. People are listening for your voice. Let me hear you. And she says, run away with me. Be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountain of spices. If there is anything that I could encourage you in, it's this. Regardless of your age, regardless of how long you've been married, regardless of what stage of your relationship you're in, don't allow romance to burn out. Don't allow romance to burn out. Don't let that fire go out. Find different ways to continue to add logs to this fireplace so that the love that you have for your spouse doesn't burn out. Because if you can continue that romance, if you can continue to have that love for each other, if you can continue to be lovey-dovey and romantic and all that cringy, weird stuff that you see in the movies and on the TVs, of standing out with the little boom box outside the girl's window, and you're playing her favorite song, and you're dancing in the rain, and you're singing, and you're doing all that weird stuff that you hate to kind of see on TV, and it makes you feel kind of weird, and if you were to see somebody doing it in person, you'd be like, there's something wrong with them. If you continue to do that, you'll allow the fire to continue to burn strong. And many of you, you've been in marriages where you know what it's like when that fire burns out. You know that it's a cold place to be. You know what it's like to not have that warmth in your home. Don't allow that to be you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day that you've given us. God, I thank you for the teaching that we can find in your word. God, I thank you that even though some of the things that we have listened to, talked about, even though they've maybe been a little awkward and uncomfortable, God, I thank you that there are lessons to still be learned. God, I thank you that you give us this little display of what it's like to have a God-centered marriage. To have one that shows romance from beginning to end. God, I pray for the married couples here. I pray for those who are seeking marriage one day. God, I pray that they would remember the words that they've heard and be able to apply it. God, I pray that you would bless their marriages and bless their relationships. God, I pray that they would allow the romance to continue. God, we thank you for your Son. We thank you for his sacrifice. We thank you for the ultimate display of love and affection. God, we thank you for his example. I pray that we would be people who would be willing to lay down our lives for our spouse. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. Whew, we are finally through. We are finally done. And now I can move into something boring and less weird that doesn't make me blush so much. As per usual, this will be the time of invitation. We will, if you have any decisions that you'd like to make, any prayer requests that you would like to lift up, any praises that you would like to lift up, this will be the time to do so. We're going to have the band come and lead us in one final song. And so if the Lord works in your heart to move you in any kind of way, this will be the time to respond.